Today, we're going to be explaining different wide receiver press releases. We're going to talk about the technique behind each release, and then we're going to talk about when to use each one. So the first release we're going to be going over is something called a wide step. So this wide step is pretty much exactly how it sounds. We're going to talk about the technique first, and then we'll talk about when to use it. So it's pretty much where you step with your furthest outside foot, so the foot furthest away from the quarterback in this situation, because the quarterback is to the inside, and you are stepping wide to try to get this DB to bite to the outside, and this is a release to take an inside release where we go to the inside on a DB. So let's play at full speed, then we'll break it down. So the first part of this release is something called a kick step. So some of you may be familiar with the kick step, but may not be familiar with the reason why behind the kick step. So what a kick step is, what Justin Jefferson does with his back foot here, right? So a kick step is where you take your back foot, you step as quickly as you can in this direction behind your front foot. It's not a real big step. You're not trying to gain a ton of ground. It is simply for explosion and to load up your hips. So when you decide to throw that wide step cut, you actually, like us loading up my hips will allow me to throw my hip with the cut. And when your hip is like almost attached to your foot when you're throwing a move like this, that's more likely to get a DB to bite. Because in press coverage, what is a DB supposed to be looking at? He's supposed to be watching our hips, so we have to sell our releases with our hips. So he kicks behind him, and that's just to create some explosion as well. Because again, it's very, very tough to do a release like this from a flat-footed position. Because what we're trying to get this DB to ultimately think is we were doing just a quick speed release to the outside and trying to release to the outside. So we take this punch or this kick step behind, we throw my hip into it. It's a jab step to the outside. You see how his hip, his shoulder, his head, everything goes with the foot to sell this move to get that DB off that platform or to at least hesitate so we could get a free inside release. So when do we want to use this? So I love this release when we have a DB who's lined up in outside shade press. Remember, his goal is to stop the outside route, and anytime that a DB shows his leverage, opposite of his leverage means that he has help. So if he's outside leverage, his help is not going to be the outside. His help is going to be to the inside where there's probably likely a safety or a linebacker dropping in coverage. So if we have to run an inside breaking route, I don't want to just take off and run the route. I want to make him think that we're going to the outside so this DB can move, so I could stay on a straight path of the route and stay as far away from the help as possible without going too far to screw up the actual play and then cut. So I'm not running right into the safety help and making it a tough window on my quarterback. So on this wide step release, I step wide. I got to bring my hip with it. That's why the kick step's important. I sell it. I get him to move, and I got to make sure that I get hip to hip with this DB. That's why we want to use it versus outside shade press. We get him to move, and if I get hip to hip with him, aka getting skinny, I stay on my straight path. I don't just run to his safety help by running away from him. So let's play this thing again, full speed one more time. Great job at that wide step release there from Justin Jefferson on that post route versus outside shade press. So now, next release we're going to be going over is something called a double up release. And this double up release is kind of builds off of the wide step release, further showcased here by Stefon Diggs. Now, before we get into that, fellas, if you're a wide receiver and you would like to train with myself and my staff of coaches this offseason, we are going to be coming out to 15 different cities and states across the U.S. for 2-day long QB and wide receiver training camps. So, guys, if you're local to one of these cities that we have on the screen right here, check out that very first link in the description below. That's where you can sign up and where you can get access to our 2-day long QB and wide receiver training camp. We're going to be coming out to San Francisco, Orlando, Phoenix, Charlotte, Austin, Chicago, Seattle, Las Vegas, Newark, Birmingham, Alabama, Houston, Boston, Columbus, Boise, and Los Angeles, California. So guys, again, if you want some more information, you want to know how you could sign up, check out that very first link in the description below. We'd love to have you there. Let's get back to this video. So now let's talk about this double up release. So this double up release, you guys, is pretty much the same thing as the wide step, just we're adding a step. So it's just a 1-2 to get that DB to jump to the inside so we could win on the outside release. Now, this double up, you could go both ways, right? So you could go where you take it on an outside release, but you could also do it where you take an inside release. The most important thing is that you want to step in the direction that you are going first. So we're trying to take an outside release, so I want to step with my outside foot first, and then I want to ultimately push off of that outside step and fake back to the inside to get him to jump, and then I get separation. Maybe the wide step release is something that I've been doing. Maybe it's something that I'm showcasing on film, so this DB might be expecting it, hit him with that 1-2, and then that's more likely to get him to jump to the inside. So let's talk a little bit about the mechanics, though. So pay attention to Diggs' first step on this move. He does something called a prep step. So every single release off the ball, usually when you pay very close attention to NFL wide receivers, either happens with a prep step or a kick step. And they do it for explosion. So a kick step, remember, like we talked about with Justin Jefferson, is you kick behind your front foot. It's quick. You're loading up your hips. Now, what a lot of guys do is take something called a prep step, and it looks a lot like a false step, where you, like, you know how when the DB's off in zone and you have to go run a post, but you take a false step so your release is slow? It's not a false step against press. press. It's a part of the release if it's for explosion. So he picks this foot up and just puts it down in the grass. What that serves to do is he pushes off of that into the first step to get some explosion. Now, on a double up, the first step isn't as important as the second step in terms of distance. Remember on the wide step, we talked about stepping wide, selling wide. We don't need to step that wide, but it's got to be quick and it's got to be inside your shoulder frame because we want to push off of this to sell the inside move because the inside move is what needs to be wide to get that DB to jump so we can go. So I love this double up release when you are attacking a DB's leverage. So remember, this is one where we go outside. So I love it against inside shade press, where it's an outside in double up, inside shade press is where you want to use it. Now, if it's an inside then out double up, we want to use it against outside shade press, where we step inside foot, fake outside to get him to bite, and then go. Very similar to the wide step. So that double up release is a great release that you guys could add to your tool belt. So now, let's talk about this next release here, which is something called a diamond release. So a diamond release is how you guys would run a slant route versus press. But let's start with how you would run a post route versus press. So if you have inside shade press for that matter specifically. So if I have inside shade press, and let's say I got to run a 10-yard post, right? This DB's job, and we know this from the last couple examples that we talked about, when he's inside shade press, his goal is to stop the inside route, right? So if he doesn't want me to go to the inside, I'm not going to be able to just get to the inside automatically just because I'm an inside breaking route. A lot of receivers will force it. This DB will keep his leverage. He's going to get hands on us, and our route will get rerouted all the way across the field. What we'd want to do is you could maybe use that double up, where you step with the outside foot first, then you fake to the inside, you get him to move a little bit, you take that outside release, and you work to stack him. Now, that would be on a post at like 10. Now, if I have to run a slant, though, I only have 3 steps, so I don't necessarily have the kind of time or have the kind of room to be able to do that and stack the DB where he's trailing me, where he's running behind me. That's what stack means for those of you that don't know. So I would try to split him in half. I would attack his outside shoulder and outside hip, and the goal is to get him to flip open rather than to stack him so I could slip under him. Because if we have to run a slant route and he's inside shade press, if I try to force the inside release and just get in front of him, again, guys, his job is to not let us go there. So he's going to get hands, which disrupts timing with our quarterback, and my slant is going to be all the way over here by the defensive line, and that's not good spacing on the play. So we got to maintain our spacing, but also get space, and that's where this diamond release comes into play. So a diamond release is 3 hard steps on a 45-degree angle. That's why they call it a diamond release, right? Because if you're drawing like a diamond on a piece of paper, or like think of it like a baseball diamond, that's to first base, obviously. It's at a 45. So you got to run at a 45 and sell vertical. Selling vertical means running with some speed. Selling vertical means running with long strides, not abnormally long, but I should say the same strides. The same strides as you would have is if you're trying to chase down a deep ball. And your body language, your hips, your shoulders, and your eyes need to be saying fade, because the goal is to get this DB to open up his hips. So again, we could slip under him. We will not be able to stack and go around him when I have a slant and he's an inside shade press. So that's how you'd ultimately do it. Now, again, you need some speed to sell this, so pay attention to Calvin Ridley's first move off the ball. Watch what his front foot does. It looks a lot like that prep step. And that prep step he takes, he pushes off of it to get him into those 3 steps to make that DB think vertical and open up his hips. All right, so now let's get to the more complex releases here. We got Davante Adams, and he's going to be doing something called a hezzy skip and go release. So this release you'd want to use, or I guess you could say this release can be used in this situation where you have inside shade press coverage. So if I have inside shade press, that DB's taught, again, to not give up the inside. Now, we talked just about that diamond release. Now, what a lot of people will do when they have to run a slant versus inside shade press, something called like a slide release, where they'll slide or hesitate to the outside, they throw a move, DB jumps, and we run back underneath on a slant. So DBs are taught when they see a receiver kind of hesitate to the outside, hold their leverage. So we could use that to our advantage if I'm trying to take an outside release like on a fade, on an out route, on a corner, or even a post. So what Adams does, Adams the master at this, because this is a great release that will allow you to react off of what a DB's doing. So he does this kick step with his back foot, little hesitation skip, and then takes off and runs and wins on this deep fade. So let's talk about how we can use that, right? So guys, the back foot is what starts this movement. Remember, it's a kick step. Now, when we do this little skip to the outside, it's important we could do this on like a 45-degree angle to make the DB choose. We want to either make him choose fade or we want to make him sit inside and think slant. right? And I'll explain how we can react off of that in a second. I want to go with that because like, let's say this way. Let's say I do this skip and I go flat. That DB could sit inside and play the slant. When I try to take off and go vertical, he could just cut me off and beat me to the angle, right? Now, if I go vertical though, and let's say he jumps to the outside, I could easily just put the brakes on and take the inside release and go get up into my route. But when I go 45, that makes him make a decision. So we come off the ball, watch what his back foot does. He kicks, he takes a little step again. He kicks with the left, it's a step with the right foot, then it's another step with the right foot, and then he makes the decision to take off and go. So it's left and then right, take off and go. Or instead of taking off and going, when he kicks right, and let's say that DB jumps, he puts the brakes on with the left foot and slips and takes the inside release. So this release is so great because against inside shade press, if we take the right angle, the kick step helps with that. It forces the DB to choose one. Do I play the fade or do I sit and play the slant? And we could use either of those to our advantage on any route that we are running. So that hesitation skip is one of the best releases that we can use. Now, this next release is called a punch crossover release. So the reason why we do this is because you are going to be punching with your back foot, then reaching with your front foot and throwing a crossover move, kind of like that double up that we showed in that Stephon Diggs clip. Now, we want to use this anytime that we have an inside shade guy and he's about 3 to 5 yards away. And the reason why we want to use it anytime is because you can play with the tempo of this release, and we'll talk about how. So the first step of this release is going to be at the back foot. You are taking like a jab step, it's a punch step, and you are going to push off of it, reach with the front foot to close the space of the DB, then we throw our move. So let's play at full speed, then we'll break it down. So he punches, reach, throws the move, and then he's back out to that back pylon. So now, why do we want to use this? Let's start with why first. Why do we want to use this versus a DB who's inside about 3 to 5 yards away? Because at the end of the day, when there's that much space between us, I can't just give a move right here. Because if I give that move right there and that DB jumps, then I got to get to the back pylon. He could still cut me off. I want to bring it right to his toes so when I get him to jump, I could easily get past him, beat him, stack him, whatever it is, and beat him to that race to the back pylon in this case. So we have to close the space. So that's where the punch step and the reach step come into play. So we punch with the back foot. You see, I know it's tough to see because this guy's helmet's in the way, but watch his knee. His knee's a good tell for this. You see how he dips down, he punches. We push off of this, we reach with the front foot, and now we're squaring him up. Now we brought that line of scrimmage to him, and then now it's just a simple crossover where I step with the right foot, fake with the left, act like I'm running a slant, attacking his leverage, and then going. Now, like I said in the beginning of this, we could also play with the tempo. So by playing with the tempo, I mean, this is a goal line fade. So it can be kind of a slower tempo right here before we throw this crossover. But let's say we're running like a corner route. And let's say we're in the middle of the field. You could punch, you could reach, you could throw the crossover at a much faster tempo. That's why I like this type of release because you could play with the tempo and it's good for any type of situation when you get a DB who's 3 to 5 yards off, inside shade man coverage like this example.